There's that sound. Oh, you know what that tells you? That tells you something's happening. Something's starting, something's cooking. Here we go. My name's Mischke. Why do we need theme songs? We need theme songs to let us know something's happening. Something other than just a day at home doing laundry or just another afternoon asleep in the backyard staring at cardinals. That's why we need theme songs. I couldn't start the show without a theme song. Dead air and then suddenly I'm talking? You can't have a voice just appear out of nowhere. First the music comes and that pulls in the host, pulls in the voice, pulls in that disembodied thing that you're going to listen to today. Music is the key to it all. The theme is so important, it's critical, it's necessary. If I ever lose the theme, my career is over. Finished. I'm done. We have a new pope, as you know, and I just want to be another in a long line congratulating him on this new position, and I hope he has a long and fruitful reign. Nostradamus had predicted this would be a black pope, and the poor Frenchman goes down swinging yet again. I think it's time we bail on Nostradamus altogether as far as predictions go, and just stay with the psychic hotline. 1-900-something, I can't remember the number, but they have as fine a track record, I believe. Speaking of predictions, by the way, I had heard that the one thing we could be sure of with this new pope was that he would not take the name Peter. That name apparently is off limits. That name is sacred. The very first pope, Peter the Apostle, is so revered in the Catholic Church that no one takes his name when they become pope. And yet the Church acknowledges that the prophecies state Peter II will be the name of the very last pope, the final pope. That's interesting when you think about it. They've agreed not to take the name Peter in deference to the first pope, Peter the Apostle, but they also acknowledge there's a church prophecy. Where's that coming from, this prophecy? A prophecy that states the last pope will be Peter II. The name of the final pope, Peter II. That means someone is going to eventually break with tradition and name himself Pope Peter II. Why is he going to do that? I thought that name was sacred. I thought that name is off limits. With the agreement that people don't use the name Peter, but the prophecies saying Peter will be the name of the last pope, the guy picking Peter as a name will obviously have to be a guy figuring out that he's the last pope. There is a tongue twister here somewhere, isn't there? With the agreement that people don't use the name Peter, but the prophecy saying Peter will be the name of the last pope, the guy picking Peter as a name will obviously have to be a guy figuring out that he's the last pope. I mean, he knows you don't pick Peter, but he knows about the prophecies. Consequently, he can only be picking that name because it looks like this pope is going to be pretty much the last pope for the church, so he's going for it. I'm Peter II. I'm the last. I know that. That's why I'm picking that one, even though we're not supposed to pick that one. What is that pope, that Peter II, that guy who picks that name, what is he seeing out there in the world when picking that name that has him convinced he's going to be the last pope? My guess is he's seeing that the Catholic Church is down to just the one remaining parish. Just the one. On planet Earth, there is but the one last parish. A little chapel in northern Oregon, off in the woods, where they rarely get news of the outside world. The last Catholic parish. Dun, 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 dun. When they go, it's over. This is obviously somewhere way in the future, when the church has dwindled for some reason, gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. Maybe it's just this one lovely chapel now, that's it. And the new pope has heard of this chapel. He's never been there. And he's thinking, well, the great Catholic Church has been getting smaller, and this is the last remaining holdout. How long can it last? This must be the end of the church, so I'm going with Pope Peter II to fulfill the prophecies. But maybe, just maybe, after he goes with Pope Peter II, he gets to wondering if maybe he shouldn't take a trip to Oregon to mention to the folks there that he's pretty much looking at them as the last of the church, and he's expecting them to go under like every other church, and it's okay. It's what the prophecies have stated will happen. No need to feel guilty about it, guys. Or maybe he just goes to Oregon to go down with the ship like a good captain. Anyway, he flies from Rome to Portland, gets in a rental car, heads up to northern Oregon. Now that church, that little chapel in the woods up there, they just have the 9 parishioners, and they're all quite old. They're deep in the woods, as I mentioned. They represent the last of the church, and the Pope arrives in a jeep, rumbling down some narrow dirt path. And these people are so deep in the woods, they're just disconnected from the outside world. They don't know what's happening out there. And they see this guy coming down this narrow dirt road through the brush, wearing this classic Pope garb, and it really throws them for a loop. By the way, when I say throws them for a loop, I know what I mean, but I don't know what I'm saying. I mean, what is this loop they're being thrown for? What if someone were to say to me, what do you mean they're thrown for a loop? You mean really shocked, almost disoriented by the sight? And I'd say, yeah. And they'd say, well, why didn't you just say that? What the heck is this loop, Mischke? They have a good point. Let's put a bookmark here on this thrown for a loop thing and get back to it later. I think it's worth revisiting. Apologies now for grabbing the nearest cliche I could find. What a joke I've become. What a punchline I am. A weak, worthless storyteller, thrown for a loop. Why do you talk that way, Tom? In my old age, I've grown daffy, dippy, ditzy, and dopey. Daffy, dippy, ditzy, and dopey. I'm a-talkin' all about the popey. I'm a daffy, and a dippy, and a ditzy, and a dopey, but I'm talking here to you about the popey. Anyway, bookmark that. Back to the 9 parishioners seeing Pope Peter II coming down the rustic dirt road through the foliage. Who is that, Dave? I don't know, Charlie. Get my shotgun. Hold on, Dave. It looks like a guy in Pope garb. Really? Well, hold on. That might actually be the Pope. Wonder what he wants. And the Pope arrives, and he introduces himself as Pope Peter II. And once again, they're thrown for a loop. Stop saying that! Pope Peter II, they know that's the name of the last Pope. They know nobody takes the name Peter until the last Pope. They are sent into a tailspin, as part of the loop. The loop they're thrown for involves a tailspin. They hear the name Pope Peter II, and they say, Your Holiness, that can only mean the church is coming to an end. Is it coming to the end of its run? Can this be? It is indeed the case, my children, the Pope says. You people represent the last of our church. What is the name of your lovely chapel here? And they tell the Pope it's the Church of St. Wilgefortis. Wilgefortis, the Pope exclaims. I didn't see this coming. The last church on earth is the Church of St. Wilgefortis? And the Pope walks into the church, and there it is, what looks like Jesus on the cross. A curvy, feminine Jesus with a beard and breasts. He recognizes it right away. That's Wilgefortis. Now, many of you listening don't know what's going on here. You're saying, did Mischke just take a weird left turn? If you have not been raised Catholic, you don't know, and those of you who have been raised Catholic may not know about Wilgefortis. You might not know that there are places in this world you can go and see what appears to be Jesus on the cross, long hair, beard, but kind of curvy, and no two ways about it with women's breasts. Well, that is not Jesus. It's a woman on that cross, not just any woman, a saint. It's the bearded saint, Wilgefortis. To me, this is one of the most disturbing stories in all of Catholicism when it comes to saints. Wilgefortis wanted to devote her life to God, and for her that meant being celibate. Her father, however, was not a Christian, and in the typical case of noblemen back then, I think this is 13th century Portugal, in the typical case of noblemen, the father wanted to marry off his daughter to royalty to better his own lot in life. But his daughter, Wilgefortis, did not want to be married off to some prince. And so her dad imprisoned her, telling her, maybe you'll change your mind after a few days behind bars. She was beautiful, Wilgefortis. The prince wanted her, but Wilgefortis did not want the prince. She prayed to God in that cell to save her from this marriage to a man she did not love, did not want. She did not want any man at all. She wanted to live for God and God alone. So she prayed for a miracle. She prayed to God for a miracle. Now, here's where I get really bothered. I would have hoped the miracle God would have provided would have been turning the prince gay or taking out the father, maybe giving the father a stroke or an aneurysm in his sleep. But no, the miracle God delivered was having Wilgefortis wake up in the morning in that prison cell with a full beard. Wait, what? Yeah, a full beard. Her father arrived at her cell that morning to see if she had finally changed her mind about marrying the prince, and there she is with a full beard, and he freaks out. I mean, freaks out in a way few dads have ever freaked out. Dear old Dad had Wilgefortis crucified. Crucified, no joke. Between you, me, and the fence post, I think that was a little extreme. As a reaction. Okay, you won't be getting rich off this gal. I get it, but let it go. Nope, he had her crucified. So she's a saint because she sacrificed everything in her devotion to God. And you can find her image today on the cross, looking like a very curvy, feminine Jesus. True story. You put the bearded lady into a search engine. Go on, do it. Well, wait a minute. You put bearded lady into a search engine, you're going to get a freak show at the state fair. But put in bearded lady Catholic saint, and you will get Wilgefortis. I promise you. So, these people at the Church of St. Wilgefortis in northern Oregon are learning they represent the last of the Catholic Church. And this comes as a complete shock. They had no idea. They were disconnected from the outside world. They just hadn't looked into the news in quite a while. It was actually like they were living in the 13th century, the time of Wilgefortis. And there the Pope was, Pope Peter II. And again, the second they heard Pope Peter II, they knew they only had a few seconds. Wait a minute. I mean, the second they learned he was Pope Peter II, they knew it was over for the church. There Pope Peter was, saying, it's a church down to 9 people living in northern Oregon praying to a bearded lady. That's what we're left with, gang. Sitting around the campfire at night. 9 older parishioners, one of whom was the priest, Father Big Bob. They sat with the Pope. Peter II roasted marshmallows. The marshmallow part's unimportant, but that's what they had. They had a couple of storage facilities filled with marshmallows. You didn't have to refrigerate them, so it was kind of nice. They were tasty, too. That helped. Some crop duster living nearby, maybe a few hundred miles away, would drop crates of them from time to time, marshmallows, from a plain, nice gesture. Anyway, one parishioner said, Your Holiness, it's going to be sad to see the Catholic Church go. I know it took some hits over the years, presented a lot of scandal, acted criminally from time to time, but there were also some really cool things. Charitable acts. Charitable acts were not a thing in Rome before the Catholic Church came along. No formal recognition of charity as an important thing in any state. It wasn't recognized by any formal state, but Rome came to recognize the need for that, thanks to the Church. The Church pushed charity. We cannot minimize that. A lot of hospitals in this world began as church initiatives. A lot of universities in Europe were pioneered, largely funded by the Catholic Church in the 11th and 12th centuries. No, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The Catholic Church, even today, the Catholic Church is the largest non-governmental provider of education and medical services in the world, manages over 150,000 schools worldwide, 26% of the world's healthcare facilities. You do not just throw that out because of the Spanish Inquisition and all that torture, the horrible crusades, the sex scandals. I mean, come on, it's the story of the world. Good and bad, light and dark. It's been ever thus. Turns out the church was made up of people. And what are people? They're horrible and they're beautiful. Anyway, the folks sitting around the fire eating marshmallows, they said, in terms of great acts of charity, building hospitals, taking care of the poor and the sick, we haven't done a whole heck of a lot of that. We mostly just hang out here in the woods. But we also don't have any scandals, no issues at all. Nobody's complaining here about mistreatment. We're just average Catholic folk, just living our lives. We're just people. And we like the rituals. I guess that's what we really want to get across to you, Your Holiness, is we just dig the rituals. We like the general idea of celebrating that there's something larger out there, recognizing this great mystery, this great force behind everything. It's just comforting to us to turn that way as part of our week. And confession is kind of neat. We like that. I mean, there's only 9 of us, but when we go into the confessional and we say something like, "Forgive me for having lustful thoughts about Denise, the wife of Ken," our priest, Father Big Bob, absolves us, and it feels great. And Ken has to then back off and realize we're all sinners, making our way in this world best we can, and he has the hottest wife, let's admit it. She's like Wilgefortis without the beard, good-looking gal, aging gracefully, and she's got a pretty nice caboose, too. Oh, forgive me, Your Holiness, for that last one. I'll do a quick Hail Mary, square things right now. Hold my beer. Anyway, Your Holiness, we ain't going to shut down just because we're the last church on earth. We'll ride this baby right into the ground. Even though we're old and don't really claim to know what's what in this mysterious universe, the wildly wondrous, impossible universe out there, even though every Sunday we get together and look at each other and wonder what we really know with certainty at all, we still feel something when all together in unison we say, "We believe in Jesus Christ, only Son of the Father, conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, crucified, died, and buried. On the 3rd day rose again, ascended into heaven, seated at the right hand of the Father. He will come again to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. We believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, and the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. Amen." It feels good to say it, Your Holiness. And we're going to keep saying it all the way to the last man. Saying it together just has a way of uniting us all, and we've been saying it since we were kids, and it's just ingrained in us. I guess it's just all about community, Your Holiness. It's just something that keeps us together, ties us together. Maybe that's its greatest gift. The Church's greatest gift is community. We need community in this world. Got to find it where we can. And we get the little communion wafer deal and a little wine. And man, after Mass, we walk into the open air singing. And I got to tell you, Your Holiness, the world just looks like a more amazing place for a few hours. Sunday afternoons, the world always just looks a little cooler. It's crazy, but it happens. It's a real thing. We can't just give that up. It's working for us. Whatever it all means, it's working for us, the 9 of us. You don't give that up without a good reason, and we don't seem to have a good reason. So onward, we're going to roll, Your Holiness. You can count on that. If you want to hang out here with us, fine. You want to go back to the Vatican, fine. If you go back to the Vatican, you'll wander those quiet, illustrious hallways alone, staring at the Sistine Chapel ceiling, smoking a cigarette on the papal balcony, taking in the wonder of it all. A world with no more Catholics. It'll be a great cigarette, though, on that papal balcony, I'll tell you that. Some cigs are better than other cigs, Your Holiness. A lot of cigarettes just bring you closer to a grave, but every now and then, and you must know this, there's a cigarette that just makes an afternoon a little sweeter. And that'll be that particular smoke that you have on that papal balcony when you head back to the Vatican, having met with the last Catholics on earth. Look forward to that cig, Your Holiness. Inhale slowly. Blow it out with your head raised, watching that smoke rise like you watched it over St. Peter's Square the day they chose you. And thanks for visiting us, Your Holiness, and letting us know what's going on in the big world out there. I'm sorry you had to come all the way, but we don't have phones. We're not on the internet. Safe travels back home. Well, now to that bookmark. I mentioned earlier the visit from the Pope threw those parishioners for a loop. It's high time we nailed down this thrown for a loop thing. Obviously, we know that to be thrown for a loop or knocked for a loop refers to being bewildered or disoriented, shocked by something. The phrase thrown for a loop first appeared in print in the 1920s, folks, and it comes from what the Oxford English Dictionary terms a centrifugal railway, but which is better known as a roller coaster. The loop on a roller coaster run is the point where the coaster arcs upward through a complete circle, leaving passengers upside down at its apex. The term was initially used in the literal roller coaster sense, thrown for a loop. That's what you learn when you research it, when you research being thrown for a loop. However, and there is a however here, however, do a little bit more digging, and you can be damn sure that I did more digging. Do a little more digging and you find controversy. Because if you leave the term thrown for a loop and stick with the word loopy, as in I'm feeling loopy, you find that back in the 1820s. 100 years earlier, before there was a single roller coaster. Loopy sounds very much related to being thrown for a loop, and yet loopy comes from a time when there was no roller coaster. Now you dig a little more and you learn, while there were roller coasters in the 1920s, there were no loops in roller coasters. Nope, not until the 1950s. This has all the makings of an international scandal on a par with some of the great scandals of all time. Okay, put away the bookmark. I'll be back to talk to Alex Hutchinson about his new book. Do you know Alex? You will. Stick around. The law firm of Bradshaw and Bryant would like you to know that if some two-bit knucklehead nitwit has recklessly and carelessly left you injured, they need to pay. Knucklehead nitwit, they need to pay. Bradshaw and Bryant want to hear your case. They'll tell you if they think you have an avenue that leads straight to some serious compensation, and if you do, you will not pay Bradshaw and Bryant until they get you your dough, making you whole again, and making that two-bit knucklehead nitwit a little more broke. That'll teach him. Knucklehead nitwit. He won't be pulling that nonsense anytime soon. Get a hold of Bradshaw and Bryant. Learn more about him at MinnesotaPersonalInjury.com. It would be painful to go to some investment advisor looking to learn all about how to manage your retirement savings and have a guy give you moronic insights. Questionable financial advice from a dolt has cost people a lot over the years, and there are idiots out there. Some apparently victims of head injuries when I look at some of the investment advice they give. Don't mess up. Go to Josh Arnold. Josh Arnold has for 40 years or more successfully helped people manage their retirement savings, their Roth IRA, their 401k. Josh Arnold is the seasoned pro in this area. He gets better and better and better with every decade. Use that experience to your advantage. Josh Arnold offers 48 minutes to you for free. Call him at 952-925-5608. Rewind that and get the number if you need it, because it won't cost you, it'll pay.
Investment services offered by Josh Arnold Investment Consultant LLC, a security and investment advisor. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All investments involve risk. Tommy Mischke is a paid endorser.
We are wired to explore, people. Off the beaten path, following unmarked trails, we're wired to explore. The search for the unknown is a primal urge in all of us, and it has shaped our history, the history of our species. But it also continues to mold our behavior. In fact, the latest neuroscience suggests that exploration in any form, whether it's trying a new restaurant, trying a new career, or deciding to run a marathon, is an essential ingredient of human life. Exploration, it turns out, isn't a hobby. It's our story, our human story. Alex Hutchinson has written a book called The Explorer's Gene: Why We Seek Big Challenges, New Flavors, and the Blank Spots on the Map. He is a powerful advocate of discovery, of exploration, of trying new things, of wandering into the unknown. It is when we are most human. It is when we are fulfilling our role as human beings, taking risks, trying new things, going into unknown areas. It's where we find meaning. It's a fascinating book, Alex. When I saw the title, The Explorer's Gene, I thought, oh, is this another book on explorers? I interviewed a guy on explorers from the 19th century recently. Maybe this is a book that looks more into that world. But you must have looked around and decided you had a very different book to write.
There's a billion books about explorers, as you know, and some of whom you've spoken to the authors. I didn't see any other books that really tried to get to this question of, why do we have this itch? What is it that drives us to order the crazy thing on the menu or to try and get through the Northwest Passage?
Yeah, and you kind of put them together as having similarities. We're seeking novelty. If you're in Spain in the 1400s and life is good, you got a nice woman and you're eating well and you have your pals, that's not novel enough. So you get a ship and you go off in the ocean not knowing what the hell is going to happen, taking enormous risks for the sake of novelty.
One of the interesting things I heard from one of the scientists I spoke to is that humans are somewhat unique in that they've spread around the world, not just when they were running out of resources. Even when things were good, they were always looking for the next big thing. I think we're drawn to novelty, and you can say, well, why are we drawn to novelty? We're drawn to the unknown because fundamentally, if you dig down deep enough, the reason for it is that it teaches us about the world. And the more we know about the world, the better we're going to be able to do to survive. So we seek the unknown, not because it's nice to be confused and not know where the heck you are, but because having this drive has equipped us to learn about the world, so we know more and more about the world. So it's not that we love chaos, it's that we love the absence of chaos, and we have to be drawn to novelty to get that.
I've often wondered why, if humans originally come out of an area where there is no winter weather, no harsh winter weather, why they moved into areas where there was really, really harsh winter weather that must have killed plenty of them. And if you say they weren't moving because they had to, but because they wanted to try something new, you could argue, well, how does that benefit humanity?
On an individual level, there's a pretty good argument for like, yeah, let's stay where the weather's good and the palm trees are plentiful. But on a species level, you want to cover your bets by finding out as much as you can about the world, covering as much of the globe as you can, and learning a bunch of different things. Because one thing we know is that on a long enough time scale, the world's going to change, and a place that was nice may not be so nice 20 generations from now.
You take this idea of exploration throughout mundane aspects of life to the most extreme pursuits. But one thing that struck me and why I think it was worthwhile to write this book is I believe you argue that while our IQs are up generally as both adults and children, creativity is down.
Yeah, so there's been a long trend for about a century now of IQ. They keep having to renormalize or readjust the IQ tests because people keep scoring better on them and they want to keep the average at 100. Well, the exact opposite has been happening with creativity tests. Ever since the 90s, they've had to readjust the scores in the opposite direction because kids keep doing worse. The rate of decline has gotten even more serious in the last decade or so. So there's something going on that is affecting not our ability to solve math problems that our teachers give us or whatever, but our ability to come up with new ideas, different ideas, and to do something that's not the same as what we've done every day in the past. It's not just these tests of creative thinking. There's analyses of scientific papers and of patents. And it just seems that breakthrough patents, things that really change the direction of a field, they're becoming less and less common. We seem to be less able to come up with genuinely new ideas.
Well, this is rather terrifying. What would be more terrifying is if we had no idea why it's happening. If we have an idea, maybe we can do something about it. But why do you think that's happening?
Kids are growing up these days on screens, being fed this steady drip, whether it's through social media, video games, or whatever the case may be, that give them the sensation of discovering something new as they scroll down the screen. But they're not actually teaching them anything about the world. They're not even requiring them to make decisions or to ask themselves, what would I find interesting? What attracts my curiosity? I would link it to a shift from active play to passive play, both for kids and adults, of being active and deciding where you want to go and just kind of being spoon-fed by the algorithm. And once you've been spoon-fed for long enough, you kind of lose the ability to follow your own creativity.
I remember as a kid getting out of the house on a Saturday, and the reason you wanted to get out of the house was the more you stayed in the house, the more likely you were to be assigned some task. And so you got out of there. You just ran out the door, but you didn't have a plan. You just got out of the house. And now what? There was no thing waiting. You just had to start wandering around. And eventually you found some other kid, or you wandered off to some wooded area, or you kicked a can down an alley till you found a garage that had one broken window and you thought, what the hell, another one's not going to hurt. But you're just trying to figure the whole thing out, not really sure how this day is going to go or what to do next. And the whole thing is kind of wandering into unknown worlds, trying to explore in your own little way. But you definitely didn't wake up with games already all set up or a planned set of things presented to you that you could interact with the way you can today. There was a lot of boredom you would face, and then you'd have to blast through that boredom into something, and there was great incentive to blast through the boredom. But the whole thing kind of happened organically, and somehow we've lost that.
Yeah. And, one of the scientists I spoke to was a guy in Denmark named Mark Malmdorf Anderson, who is a kind of theorist of play, which is an awesome, awesome subject of study. And he really makes a connection between, like, exploring is discovering something new. It's pursuing the unknown. Play is the process of creating that feeling of uncertainty. You're creating a game that allows you to feel like you don't know what's going to happen. One of the examples he gives is you take your kid to a park. The kids see a slide and they're like, I wonder what it feels like to go down that slide. So they run and they go down the slide a few times. And then after that, they know what it feels like to go down the slide. So then that's boring to them. There's no more uncertainty there. So they're like, I wonder what it's like to go up the slide. But they're very sensitively attuned. Kids who are playing freely, they're attuned to that feeling of what's new. Where am I learning something about the world? that skill of being out in the world and being able to not be told what you're going to do, but to be bored. What can we do that will be interesting, that will tap into that feeling that we're learning something new? That is also the skill in adults, what enables them to be creative and come with new ideas, to feel like, oh, what is new? What is interesting? What is different? And so if kids don't get the chance to be out there having to entertain themselves, they're maybe not learning this skill that will enable them to grow up as more creative adults.
You had a way of looking at sports I hadn't thought about, that so much of the fun of it was that we were creating an unknown. The known was, yeah, we knew how to play baseball. We knew how to catch a ball, knew how to throw a ball, knew how to hit a ball. The unknown was we were creating a situation where we didn't know who was going to win. Could be this team, could be this team. We don't know. Let's see. And that much of the thrill was moving toward that.
Yeah, it's interesting because intuitively, especially if you ask a kid, but even as an adult, you're like, boy, I'd like to be on the winning team. I'd like to really smoke those guys 25-0. But if you've ever had the good fortune of being on a team that smokes everyone else 25-0, you realize how boring it gets pretty quickly. Sports become interesting when you don't know what the outcome is. One of the scientists I quote in the book said something like, we're willing to pay huge sums of money to not know how something ends. If you're watching a basketball game or something, and someone comes in and says, oh, I already know how this ends. Shut up. Don't tell me how it ends. The whole experience, the ball going through the hoop and the bounce passes and all the other things, none of those are different. But as soon as you know the outcome, they lose their meaning. It's no longer interesting because you're no longer on a journey where the destination is unknown.
Certainly in Western culture, there's an ability to create a very predictable day, because unpredictability comes with anxiety, and it's supposedly an anxious age. In fact, I hear, especially with 20-somethings, it's more anxious than any generation going back as far as anyone can remember.
One of the reasons a 25-year-old is so anxious in dealing with uncertainty is that they've grown up without having to face uncertainty. So growing up and being outside, playing on your own, and not being sure whether you can jump down from that fence without breaking your ankle, but figuring out you need to get down anyway, and facing that anxiety and that uncertainty, you learn the tools for dealing with anxiety, dealing with uncertainty. And if you grow up in a context where every playground you go to has been de-risked, you're never in any situation where you're called upon to use your own resources, then when you're 25 and you realize, I don't know what my career is going to be, I don't know if I'm going to get a job, I don't know if I'm going to find someone who will marry me, you have no tools to deal with that anxiety. So it's kind of like facing uncertainty in childhood and throughout your life equips you to deal with the irreducible uncertainty of the world.
It's funny because you could imagine, based on what I'm hearing you say, you could imagine a child development book being written, a book to help parents raising children that read, it's very important that you ensure your kid finds him or herself in environments where they'll break an arm or a leg. There is this line that you have to draw that will result in a certain amount of damage, a certain amount of struggle, a certain amount of pain, a certain amount of profound heartache, hopefully just not anything permanent. If you can get a kid through a childhood like that, you win. Protecting them so they avoid all that will ultimately do damage in the long run. It's a very strange way to have to navigate parenthood.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with what you're saying, but that doesn't mean that I think it's easy or to do. And I have kids that are 9 and 11 right now, and yesterday my 9-year-old was going off with a friend to bike through the neighborhood on their own, and I watched them out the door as they sort of wobbled down the street towards a stop sign where cars are coming. And I'm yelling after them, like, stay on the right side of the road. And stop it, stops. Don't forget. This is stuff I've told them a billion times before, but I'm still like, do they understand how serious it is if they pedal through a stop sign? And if they don't, and if they get hit by a car, that's permanent, as you said. So it's like, I'm in theory 100% agree with, we need to give them risk, even in situations where there's potential that they can hurt themselves. But it's still hard to execute in real life.
You will have things go wrong when you allow any kind of freedom. You will have things go wrong. You just hope it's not bad.
0% risk can't be the goal. The cost is too high. We have to accept that there are going to be some sad outcomes. But the world we create in aspiring to 0% risk is also bad.
You make the point in the book, The Explorer's Gene, that the brain actually is built to not want surprises, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So why doesn't that fit with this idea of wanting to move into the unknown?
I got hung up on this for a while, trying to understand this. So there's this relatively new theory in neuroscience called predictive processing, which is the idea that your brain's goal is to minimize surprise. Because if we minimize surprise, then we're not going to get eaten by a lion jumping out. We know what's happening. And so this leads to what neuroscientists and philosophers call the dark room problem, which is the idea that if we want to minimize surprise, the best way to do that is to head into my closet, close the door, and there we go. I will never be surprised again. I know exactly what's going to happen next, which is nothing. And the answer is that we're not just trying to minimize surprise right now. We're trying to minimize surprises coming down the pike towards us in the future. In order to do that, we need to learn about the world. We need to understand the world. So the best way to minimize surprise overall is to get out of the closet and be attracted to the unknown, doors we haven't opened, to figure out what's behind the door, because then we're going to learn about the world.
People hear this over and over and over again in this world, and I don't know how many people can explain how it actually works, but dopamine.
Oh boy, here we go.
What is dopamine?
You are asking the hard questions today, because dopamine is super complicated. You're right. We hear about it a ton, right? Like we're craving a dopamine hit, and that's why we're scrolling through social media or snorting crack cocaine. Dopamine is a brain chemical. It mediates which signals are sent from one neuron to the next in the brain. What it's not is a pleasure chemical. We don't get a hit of dopamine because something was good. We get a hit of dopamine when something is better than we expect. So if I see a delicious looking donut in the window and I eat that donut and it's better than anything I've ever tasted before, I get a hit of dopamine. And what dopamine is doing is telling me, remember this donut was awesome. Have this donut again. Now, if I come back every day for the next 10 days and have that donut, I know exactly what the donut tastes like. It's not better than expected. It's as expected. So I don't get a hit of dopamine and it's not as satisfying. And I'm effectively bored of that donut and I want something new and something different.
A guy lays on the same couch every Saturday and takes a nap. It's very comfortable. He's thrilled that he has these hours off work and he's going to take a nap and he's really going to enjoy it. There's no dopamine there. But he one day visits his pal at a lake cabin and for the first time tries out a hammock under a shade tree by a lake. Never really knew what they felt like. And whoa, between the breeze and this comfort and this movement and the trees and the shade, this is way better than my couch. Dopamine City.
Exactly.
So whether you're those 19th century explorers going out or just someone looking for a new place to take a nap, preserve surprise.
Yeah. Dopamine isn't a theory of everything. So we do things for different reasons. We do things because we're hungry. We do things because we're seeking status. One of the things that nudges us in one direction or another is if we can find that sense of surprise. And I think one of the things that makes life feel satisfying is if we can find places in our lives to be surprised, to not feel like, is this a day in May 2025 or is this 2023 or 2021? Who can say? Because I do this exact same thing every day.
You hear of some optical stores having a sale on eyewear frames, and you get a little excited. Then you see which optical store it is, and you get a little less excited. Well, I'm here to tell you about an optical store eyewear frame sale that will leave you so excited you won't be able to pass it up. No chance of that, because it's Spectacle Shop. The eyewear store recently voted Best in Minnesota by St. Paul Minneapolis Magazine, by Minnesota Women's Press, by the Star Tribune, by other media outlets as well. They're having a very brief $59 frame sale, just 4 days, May 15th through the 18th. But $59, that's a crazy drop in price, people, for these frames. All you got to do is make sure you buy prescription lenses. Frames normally $250 to $800, only $59. And this is Spectacle Shop, the high end of eyewear fashion. Are you excited now? Go to spectacleshop.com. Make an appointment for this sale. It is only at their New Brighton location. This is your opportunity. This is your time. Do it now. spectacleshop.com. You have to look into a memory care facility for your loved one, your spouse, your parent, your grandparent. You don't just pick a place because you find one online, one that's convenient, nearby. No, this is your cherished family member. You don't place them anywhere without first touring the facility, checking it out. That's the least you do. I'm here to tell you, if you simply tour the Wellshire of Bloomington and Medina, if you just tour it, you will not be able to place your loved one anywhere else. You'll be blown away with how different the Wellshire is from any other place you've considered. Exceptionally different in every way, and every one of those differences are critically important differences. Differences you'll be eternally grateful for. But you have to learn this for yourself. Tour the Wellshire of Bloomington and Medina. See why they are in their own league, and what an extraordinary league it is. The Wellshire of Bloomington and Medina. I'm speaking with Alex Hutchinson, author of The Explorer's Gene, Why We Seek Big Challenges, New Flavors, and the Blank Spots on the Map. One thing I wanted to get into before we finished this interview was the effort paradox. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this is an idea that psychologists, they coined the term in 2018, but it's an idea that people have been wrestling with for a long time, which is, why do we like doing hard things? Traditionally, the sort of economic view of it is we're willing to do hard things because there's going to be a reward that makes it worthwhile. So I will climb up this mountain because, boy, the view is going to be amazing from the top. But the truth is, when you really dig into it, that's not a really satisfactory explanation of why we do hard things. There are a lot of people who climb mountains where if you told them, actually, there's an escalator on the other side, you can get to the top and see the view, they would say, no, I don't want to be at the top of the mountain. I want to climb the mountain. Why do people run marathons? 99.9999% of the people, it's not because they think they're going to win. They're taking on something that's very hard for reasons that are hard to explain. There's research on something called the IKEA effect, which is that people tend to value the furniture that they've had to wrestle with and assemble more than if they were to receive the identical piece of furniture pre-assembled. Sometimes we like things not in spite of the fact that they're hard, but because they're hard. And there's a lot of efforts to understand why this is. The one that's most satisfying to me is that they think people tend to find things that are difficult meaningful. Meaning is a hard thing to define, but it's, if you ask someone, was that a meaningful thing you just did? If it's hard, they're more likely to say yes. People who set out on these difficult but meaningful things also tend to report being happier and making more money at work.
Creating struggle. Why would you create struggle? Why would you make something difficult? Why would you do something purposely difficult if you didn't have to? You're arguing we seem to need that.
There's a famous definition of what it is to play a game from a philosopher named Bernard Suits, which is that playing games is the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. A lot of what we do in this modern world is the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. And, I'm a runner, so this example is natural to me, but like a marathon, it may be many things, but it is not necessary. It is an unnecessary obstacle. And yet we seem to find great meaning from it. It doesn't serve any intrinsic purpose. It's that you feel that you've done something.
And I'm glad you haven't even argued that you're a healthier person for having done the marathon than someone who takes brisk walks every day.
You're absolutely right. If you're running marathons, fundamentally, unless you've been misinformed, you're not doing it because you think it makes you healthier. People who are running marathons, they're pursuing something that's different than lowering their risk of heart disease.
Manufactured difficulty is something I've watched a lot in my life. I mean, there was a time when it was just hard, It was hard to discover places. It was hard to get across the ocean. But when it gets easier, we still keep making it hard. We still keep making life hard for some reason. Your marathon is making life hard. There might have been a time when it was good to run that many miles. Maybe something was chasing you. It has fascinated me because I haven't known why we're manufacturing difficulty for ourselves.
The analogy I would give is there was a time when we all had to do lots of heavy physical work in order to feed and clothe and shelter ourselves. And now a great many of us can sit at a desk all day and, never move our muscles. And we've come to recognize that that's not good for our bodies. So I think what we're seeing here is an analogy to that for the brain, the recognition that if things are too easy for the brain, it's the cognitive equivalent of vegging out on the sofa, not just on Saturday afternoon, but every day of the week. Exploring is a way of engaging our brains and taking on challenges, taking on difficult tasks. It's a way of using our minds in the same way that we know we need to use our bodies.
You have 5 principles in your book. One has to do with explore versus exploit.
And this is an important point because maybe the misapprehension I might have started out with when I started working on this book was that exploring is great. We should always explore. Exploring more is great. The opposite of exploring is exploiting, which is taking advantage of the knowledge you have. And there are times when that is absolutely the smartest thing to do, that you've explored, you've worked hard to gain some knowledge. Now you're going to exploit it by, now you know what the best dish is at your local restaurant. And by golly, that's the one you're going to order when you go to that restaurant. We're always facing these sorts of explore versus exploit dilemmas. And it's important to be thoughtful about when we do one and when we do the other and not assume that it's always better to exploit or always better to explore.
Yeah, you find some path you never knew about in the woods somewhere, and it leads to some waterfall and swimming pool, and it's great. And now you know it's there. You don't say, well, I'm never coming here again. I'll have to find some new thing I've never seen before. The exploiting is, let's go swimming. Let's go here frequently. Let's enjoy this now that we've explored and found it. So there's that balance between the two. Embrace struggle was one of the principles. We talked about that. Play more, the sense of play, time and space away from responsibilities to play. Another important principle. Look for the uncertainty sweet spot.
We all have a sweet spot where it's not that we're craving complete confusion, but we're craving enough unpredictability to keep it interesting and not so much that we're totally overwhelmed.
This was my favorite. Minimize regret.
Yeah. So this is, again, when you're trying to optimize this explore exploit dilemma, figuring out when should I explore, when should I exploit? You're facing two choices. You're not sure whether to explore or exploit. Look at the upside. If things went well, go with that one, because that is the way that will minimize regret. We can never guarantee we're always going to make the right choice. Life is uncertain. But what we can do is make choices such that even if it doesn't turn out the way we wanted, we look back and say, I don't regret the choice I made. This was the right choice. Easy example is you're leaning against the wall at the high school dance, wondering whether to ask that girl to dance. If you ask her to dance, you might get humiliated, but you might get a chance to dance with her. And if you don't, there's a lesser upside. You don't get humiliated. You also don't get the chance of dancing with her. So optimism in the face of uncertainty is ask her to dance. And I think we all know intuitively that looking back from, my now advanced age, there's no time I ever regret having made a choice the equivalent of asking the girl to dance. And there's a lot of times that I regret taking the safe choice and not asking the girl to dance.
I've heard you give an example of 2 job possibilities for someone who's looking for a job. One is a job that's not going to pay a ton and not going to allow for a lot of advancement, but you are going to be comfortable. It is in your wheelhouse. It is what you're good at, and it will offer you some security. There's another job that is kind of in your wheelhouse, and you have been stretching of late and moving in that direction. And if it were to pan out for you, wow, it would be possibly your dream gig. And you're trying to decide which way to go. Using your argument, you would take the risk.
I've given this example before, and some of the pushback I get is like, well, that's an awfully privileged position to take, because what happens if you then can't pay your rent? So the answer is, none of this guidance is like the only thing you should consider. If you're paycheck to paycheck and you're supporting your parents and blah, 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 you probably want to take the safe bet. But if you are able to deal with the fact that maybe the other job, you'll get fired after 6 months, if that wouldn't be a total disaster, but it also has the pathway to what would be your absolute dream job, that's the better choice.
Here's what I love about it. I would argue for, especially if you're on your own, if you don't have a family to support, I would always argue take the risk. And where I first learned this was I, years and years ago, asked people in their late 80s or 90s to call me on my radio show and pass along advice to the young people listening. They had lived a life. Surely they learned some things, and maybe they could prevent us from facing some things they had to face if we would just listen to a few things they had to say. It was astounding to me how many of them over and over and over again said the same thing, that what you are going to regret, and you better get this through your thick skulls, is what you didn't do. You will not regret what you did. That is not what an end of life regret is all about. It's going to be all the things you didn't do. And I have tried to remember that every day of my life since. This crazy thing I want to try, do it. It just fell apart. It was a mistake. Oh, it's awful. It didn't work out at all. That's not where my regret's going to be. It's going to be the risks I failed to take. When I saw Minimize Regret in your book, it just brought back all those old folks giving me that warning.
That's so powerful to hear. You can look at the mathematical calculations they used to come up with this idea, but it pales in comparison to the actual lived experience of people coming to exactly the same conclusion, which is do it. Take your shot if you possibly can.
I mean, I think there's something you say that also ties into this. Say yes to things as much as possible. I mean, there's going to be times when it's just an obvious no, but when you're waffling, saying yes is kind of like saying yes to life. These opportunities, these things are coming up and you're going back and forth. Lean toward yes with the idea that if it isn't going to destroy you, if it isn't going to just ruin your whole day or week, go toward the yes as much as possible. It's something that makes a lot of sense to me.
That's exactly the advice I got from Mark Melndorf Anderson, the play expert, when I asked him about advice for bringing up kids. Like, how do you bring up kids to have more exploratory play? His rule of thumb is say yes as much as you can. He has parameters. I have parameters. I'm not going to let my kids do anything they want. But if something seems interesting, let them pursue it. Let them find out.
Yeah, and kids want to do weird things. They are often things that have nothing to do with danger. They're just weird. People say no to them because, well, that's a little odd. There is nothing that's going to go wrong. I remember my kids wanted to try on every single life jacket up at a lake cabin that there was, including eventually duct taping them just to go throw themselves off a dock. And someone, don't do that. I don't want to have to go get those life jackets later. The tape's going to ruin them. I mean, there is sort of a sense. I've always had this feeling that one should try to live a wild life. And by wild, I mean, we're not in the wilds anymore. And we don't face the wilds anymore. But the thrill of life is the wildness of life, the idea of the unpredictability and the sense of the unknown and the thrill of it all. It all seems tied up in that wildness. And it's not going to be brought to your front door anymore, if it ever was.
Agreed about the wildness and the lure of unpredictability. And the fact is, not just your kids, you need to do crazy things too. And it doesn't just happen automatically when we have this alternative to be comfortable and predictable all the time. There's a sort of immediate self-preservation that draws us to cling to predictable and safe. But there's this deeper ancestral call of the wild, as it were.
It's all fascinating stuff, and you can obviously learn one heck of a lot more about it by simply reading the book. Alex Hutchinson is the author. The Explorer's Gene, Why We Seek Big Challenges, New Flavors, and the Blank Spots on the Map. Alex, I appreciate your time and your good work on this book. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks so much, Tommy. This has been a really fun chance to dig into some of the nuances.
Best of luck to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I was looking at the Hot Buys section of the EcoFun Motorsports website, seeing what I could find in the Hot Buys category, and it was enticing. One heck of a cool-looking black Scoot Star electric bike, I'll tell you that. The Scoot Star electric bike charges up for about 6 hours of riding, goes about 30 miles an hour, looks cool as all get out. I also saw a 4-person Kawasaki side-by-side for taking a crew of people off-road, built to really tackle the tough trails. You ever been in a side-by-side? Rugged as heck, those things. Of course, there's also Kawasaki motorcycles. There's youth dirt bikes at EcoFun Motorsports, scooters, Vespas, ATVs. You ought to head to EcoFun Motorsports in Forest Lake and just take in everything that they have there to make it a summer of absolute thrills for you in the open air, riding across the wild terrain of this world, big old smile on your face. EcoFun Motorsports. It's where everything fun on wheels can be found. EcoFunMotorsports.com. I like looking at all the different kinds of industrial pressure washers there are. I don't know why. Maybe I just want to play with them. I had no idea there were so many different types of pressure washers, and I had no idea the sheer number of businesses who routinely need and use all sorts of different pressure washers. And the best businesses out there know that when you need these pressure washers repaired, you call American Pressure. They have service vans that come out to you. The very best businesses out there, they know that when you need parts for your pressure washer, you go with American Pressure. Thousands of parts in stock, folks. And the best out there, they know that when it's time to upgrade, they're not going to waste their time at an operation that does not have the reputation of American Pressure. That's wasted time, that's wasted money. American Pressure, remember it. Since the early 80s, they've been the heralded leader, the superstar in the world of pressure washers. It's why the best go there. Where are you going? Learn more at AmericanPressure.com.
Hello.
Hey, this is Mischke calling.
Yes,
Who am I talking to?
this is Dan Trinkle.
You say your name's Dan Trinkle?
Yes.
What nationality is that?
Well, we think it's probably German.
Trinkle, trinkle, little star. Am I calling you in Indiana?
Yes.
You know, I was thinking about Indiana the other day, and here's what I came up with. It's the state written about least in any newspaper I ever look at. Maybe second to Idaho. It's almost as though nothing's happening there. What does go on there?
Race once a year.
Race problems. Oh, the
Well-
race. I forgot about the big race. You got the big race. And then you got that Mellencamp fella. He's still living out there?
I don't know.
He
Somewhere.
was born in a small town, and he was going to stay in a small town and die in a small town. I'm hoping he's sticking with the same small town. Why would he move? In fact, doesn't he make the point that he's going to stay in the same small town? But Letterman left you.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll tell you something. Prince kept a place here to his dying day, and Bob Dylan had a farm here. I think he still might. Corcoran, somewhere around there. I can't remember, on the Crow River. But old Dave Letterman, I believe he headed to Montana.
Well, I think Minnesota's got a little more going for it than central Indiana.
What do you do with your life?
I mess with computers. I work at Purdue.
Hey, there's a big thing in Indiana, Purdue. That's
Well,
huge.
that's true.
And then, of course, you got some other school that's big into basketball, don't you? Where'd Bobby Knight coach?
Indiana University, which is down in Bloomington,
Yeah.
south half of the state.
And
So-
wasn't there another fella that came out of Indiana, a little town called French Lick? Whatever the hell kind of a name that
Yeah.
is. A fella by the name of Larry Bird?
Yes.
French
course.
Lick. I
Yep.
know what a French kiss is. I don't even want to know what a French Lick is. Is that a porn site?
No, it's an old spa town.
Old Spa Town? That's the first time I've ever heard that term in my life. Why, it's an old spa town. It's where the cowboys used to come in and get their spas. What the devil is an old spa town? That's an old massage town. It was an old ancient massage town.
It's a resort, and they have spas down there.
Wow, you never hear of anybody saying, my husband and I were going to spend a month at a resort in Indiana. You getting a good deal on that, or what kind of resort you going to? Oh, it's a really old massage town.
There were resort towns in northern Indiana, because it's right along the southern shore of Lake Michigan. So people used to come out there was a shoreline railroad that came from Chicago. And there were some, in the early 1900s, there were some pretty fancy resorts up there.
What's your first name again?
Daniel.
I got to write that down next to your name. Daniel Trinkle. That last name is going to stick with me. 3 a.m. tonight, I'm going to be thinking of that. Daniel Trinkle. What was the guy's name in Taxi Driver? Travis Bickle? Daniel Trickle and Travis Bickle?
There is I think it's a Dick Trickle is a race car driver.
Dick Trickle!
Yes.
And do you know that there was a Major League Baseball player when I was growing up? I had his baseball card. I believe his name was Dick Pole. When I was growing up, for a baseball card, you could wind up with a piece of gum and a card featuring Dick Pole and Pete Lecoq. These are real Major League Baseball players. And the father of Pete Lecoq was Peter Marshall, the host of the Hollywood Squares. Certainly understand why he changed his name. Paul Lynde would have had a field day with Pete Lecoq. Just let that go. Don't think any further with that one. But Peter Marshall changed his name from Pete Lecoq to Peter Marshall, but his kid was Pete Jr., so he was Pete Lecoq, and then there was another ball player named Dick Pole. You say your name's Dan Trinkle?
Yes.
All right. How did you ever come across my program?
We had a few grad students here from Minnesota, and I can't remember if I heard about you first from them or if it was because I remember hearing about the Gordon Lightfoot interview sometime early, and then I know that we saw an article about you in the Atlantic Monthly.
Well, those are probably the two things that traveled furthest. The Atlantic piece and the Gordon Lightfoot clip.
Yes.
That Gordon Lightfoot clip developed a life of its own after a while.
And as soon as I could get access, when they started putting stuff on the web on KSTP, I was able to listen.
Well, I've enjoyed talking to you. I really have, Dan. I hope I talk to you again sometime.
All right.
You take care of yourself.
It's been fun.
So long.
Bye.
Well, that's going to do it for this show. My 13th show. I have completed it. It's over. My guess is I will end up doing about 200 here at Hubbard Broadcasting. I just finished here, number 13. At about 80, I think I'll really get it down. I'll really find myself in a groove. I'll be just cooking at about show 80, show 70, somewhere in there. By about show 150, I'm going to be dragging. It probably will be wise for me to leave, but I won't. I'll go a little longer than I should. 160, 170, those are going to be some rough shows. At 180, I'm going to be dying. Finally, I'll bail. By the time I do my 200th show, I'll be a little puddle. And I'll finish for good. I'll be done for good. This is my last hurrah, this gig right here. I'm on my way to becoming an old man, and it's going to be time in a few years to say enough. Enough. Finally, enough. All right, then. Until next week. So long.